I've been very, very open in the past about, obviously I lost my job to COVID. Unfortunately, again, nothing that, I could really do about it. And, just unfortunately happened with the way that the business was at the time. We were a company of about 25 people. There are now about 4 people in the business now. And I do really hope they do survive. Like I say, the company had no money coming in since March. And even with the furlough coming in and Rishi Sunak dithering about the furlough, which is again what caused us all to be made redundant, no other way to put it. It's been a pretty bad time, I think. But looking forward, though, and especially in the past, I don't know how it's been for other people, but the past 2 weeks, been a complete turnaround, a complete turnaround. It's almost as if someone has just literally turned on a tap. And I've had a lot of job offers for like interviews and things like that. And I've got one to, like, I've literally got from tomorrow, I've got one on Thursday and Friday in terms of interviews, and I've got others planned for next week as well. So, fingers crossed, but it's all go at the moment, which is quite fun. But the economy and how it is planned out, I think everyone recognizes that we can't just go back to business as usual post the pandemic, because the pandemic uncovered just how bad worker pay had stagnated, the inequalities, not just in cities but everywhere in the UK. It exposed all these inequalities, and even in the conservative areas where you now see big wig conservatives like Steve Baker, literally, who pushed constantly for cutting of the social care benefits and all sorts of benefits for people to help them live on, has now suddenly had a miraculous change of heart because people in his constituency, because of COVID, have had to face the realities of these systems that they might have never had to face before. And all of a sudden, here's the guy saying, well, I want to cut all these things. And all of a sudden, now his seat's in trouble. Well, maybe he needs to look at this. And I've said before, with these new problems, we need not only new solutions, but radical solutions to weigh and to look at this. And America under Joe Biden is going a drastically different path than has previously any president has been done since Reagan. And it's going to be an interesting challenge because, again, both Labour and the Conservatives really will have to rise to meet these new economic challenges. Whether they will or not is yet to be seen. Starmer almost certainly has put out policies which are very, very similar to what Joe Biden is doing, whereas currently with Boris and the Conservatives, well, there just isn't a plan. When I've said this before, there is no recovery plan for the UK, which is really shocking, but there you go. But anyway, before we do jump into this article, please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, buy me a coffee. And as always, thank you very much to all the people who do support the channel that way. So let's jump into this then, shall we? This comes from The Guardian. The title is, Western Economics Can't Return to Business as Usual After the Pandemic. So as Western economies emerge from the pandemic, their governments face a choice. Do they seek to address the profound problems that COVID exposed, or try to return to business as usual and as quickly as possible, which is almost certainly what the Tories in this country are certainly trying to do? Their problem isn't Their problem is that many of the issues exacerbated by the pandemic, such as wage stagnation, precarious work, and of course rising inequality, are not bugs in an otherwise well-functioning system, but inevitable outcomes of the way that Western economies are now organized. So a business as usual approach just simply won't work, and much more fundamental change is needed. The US government actually seems to recognize this. Joe Biden's economic plans are a radical departure from the era that stretches all the way from Reagan to Obama, when governments sought to keep taxes and public spending low and focus principally on globalized trade and the education and training of the workforce. Unlike his predecessors, Biden is pushing large-scale public spending and taking advantage of the low interest rates to borrow for infrastructure investment. His stimulus also plans to target climate crisis while creating green jobs and expanding health, education, and childcare. The social infrastructure that is essential to the economy, but has often been ignored by mainstream economists. Biden is not either afraid to raise taxes. He has proposed significant hikes to corporation tax and the top rate of income tax, and nearly doubling that of capital gains tax. In the labour market, his administration is committed to running what the US Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen calls a high-pressure economy, where sustained economic demand pushes wages up and improves working conditions. He is also taking on big businesses as well, introducing a raft of measures to try and clamp down on anti-competitive practices by monopolistic corporations. Biden's policies have surprised many, and they've certainly surprised me, but they did not emerge from thin air. His administration has drawn on a wealth of new thinking that has emerged in response to the economic crisis of the last decade. The 2008 global crash demonstrated that a new form of capitalism dominated by finance had become deeply unstable. This was followed by long years of austerity and slow growth, stagnating wages, stalling productivity, and extreme inequality. Meanwhile, the climate and environmental breakdown threatens catastrophe for even the richest of economies. Grappling with these problems, and a growing number of economists have explicitly rejected the orthodoxy of free markets and the hands-off government that has dominated Western economic policy for over the past 40 years. So again, not very good news for the Brexiteers who want to go down that exact path. So some of the ideas also revive the economics of John Maynard Keynes, who saw the government spending is needed to stimulate demand for goods and services during a recession. More recently, economists have recognized the idea of the era of ultra-low interest rates and fiscal policy, spending and taxation should play a major role in how the economy is managed. Many also now acknowledge that there are absolutely no constraints on public debt, and as long as low interest rates keep the cost of borrowing affordable, borrowing is used to fund investment, which further raises national income and therefore brings in more taxes. The ratio of debt to GDP will ultimately fall. By contrast, trying to reduce debt through austerity policies is self-defeating and even harmful, as the last decade has proved. Economic thinking is also shifting in response to climate and nature crises. It is no longer suffering to use a very few market-based environmental taxes and product regulations to achieve the net zero emissions. The whole economy needs to be geared towards these goals. And I've talked before, if Boris Johnson seriously wants to level up the country, then he should be investing in turning the British steel industry into a net carbon zero steel industry, which is only possible if the British steel industry gets government support. But unless it gets government support, that ain't happening. So at the same time, an active industrial strategy is also needed to support greener technologies and consumption patterns, with job creation programs for workers and communities adversely affected by the green transition. The new economies reorganizes that cutting inequality will mean tackling the renter economy, which is concentrated asset ownership in the hands of the wealthy. This will mean curtailing monopolies and regulating the financial sector to focus on long-term investments, not short-term wealth extraction. Wealth and land should be more highly taxed, while using public procurement and support of community wealth building can ensure that local economies retain their wealth and jobs. Welfare reforms such as a guaranteed minimum income is needed to end poverty. Systematic gender and racial inequality must also be eradicated. These ideas have come together in the Green New Deal. Above all, many are starting to realize that economic policy needs to end its fixation with growth. Growth was never the only aim, but economists have long assumed that this would just solve most all problems. Now it is clear that this was never the case. New ideas for post-growth economies are emerging, which focus on environmental stability, reducing inequalities, improving investment and individual and social well-being, and ensuring the economic system is more resilient to shocks. During previous periods of the economic crash, prevailing ideas of the economy should be organized and managed were overturned in favor of new theories. The Great Depression of the 1930s led to the Keynesian Revolution and the full employment welfare state. The crises of the 1970s led to the deregulation and privatization of doctrines of Thatcher and Reagan. It is still too early to tell whether such a paradigm shift is occurring today, but Biden must still get his economic plans through Congress. In the UK, the major parties are still pondering how to actually build back better. Boris Johnson and Keir Starmer have acknowledged the priority of tackling climate change and levelling up the inequalities, but neither they nor the most commentators seem to have recognized how economics is changing in response to the current crisis. The issue is no longer simple about how much a policy will cost or how it will be paid for. There is just a new wealth of new thinking on which they can draw and try to adjust the deep changes to what economics actually face. The old orthodoxies have failed. The post-pandemic world will ask new questions and new answers are needed. And I think that's, again, we've talked about this before about the opportunities Labour really has at the moment. And I think if Starmer really wanted to do this and unleash this new potential of these new economic ideas, it could work. He could absolutely destroy the Conservatives on economic grounds, because even fiscal conservative people who consider themselves, more fiscally conservative would vote for policies that would ultimately, for example, he could basically turn around and say, look, the policies the Tories want are the policies of the past that led to the 2008 crash, austerity that has proven, it cannot work. So we need to turn around and we need these new fresh ideas. And I think these new fresh ideas would dominate and could very easily dominate, the next decade, if not more, but they just need to be brought forward. And I hope, like I say, as we saw with Ed Miliband, who said back when he was running for the party, said he wished he had been a lot more braver on, not only economic policies, but social policies as well. And I think I would encourage definitely Starmer that he needs to be more braver and really take a stand on some policies and not be scared to not be ambitious when it comes to creating these policies. And currently, we have seen, of course, the Buy British policy and the fair wages policy that it hasn't come out in a policy yet, but it's currently an interesting slogan that could have indeed a lot of power behind it. So, like I say, as time will always tell, we'll have to see what happens with these policies, how they will come out, and what opportunities there are, because we've still got to see, we are still coming out of the pandemic. So we've got to see really what the lay of the land becomes in, the next 6 to possibly 12 months. But as I've said, 2022 is going to be hard for a lot of people because Brexit, as we have seen, it's raising prices, it's bottlenecking our industries here in the UK. Our growth is going to be slowed hugely in this case. And I always bring up the spectre of Brexit, but no other country is facing that except us. And especially next year, Brexit's really going to hit home, So, as always, thank you very much to all people for watching. And of course, before you leave, please remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button down below. And of course, there are links down below to support me on Patreon, as well as the one-off donation link called Buy Me a Coffee, where you can, buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much to all the people watching, and I'll see you all next time.